Hi, we're here with our Christmas story initiative for another Christmas story. I have a guest with me this evening. We have this mouse, Christmas mouse. You can tell he's a Christmas mouse because of all his wintry outfit. Have you ever seen a mouse with this big of ears who you weren't willing to chase out of the house? I mean, this is a friendly guy. He might have a name. Oh, Ralph, yes. Tag name. Ralph. This is Ralph the mouse. Ralph's going to be joining us this evening for the Christmas story.
Well, that's very fine.
Well, sure it is. Our story this evening is entitled A Few Bars in the Key of G. The author is unknown. It was 2 o'clock, and time for the third watch on the night herd. There, two facts gradually impressed themselves on the consciousness of John Talbot Waring as he was thumped into wakefulness by the Mexican house wrangler. He unrolled his slicker, which had been serving as a pillow, enveloped himself in its clammy folds, and went out into the drizzling rain. The cattle were unusually quiet, needing little attention, and Waring had ample opportunity to reflect on the disadvantages of a cowpuncher's life. As he rode slowly along the edge of the black mass of sleeping animals, the rain dripped from the limp brim of his sombrero. The chill wind, sweeping down from the mountains, pierced his damp clothes and made him shiver in the saddle. For the 100th time within a week, Waring condemned himself for relinquishing the comforts of civilization for this hard life of Colorado. He recalled his arrival on the range 6 months before, a tenderfoot, and the various tribulations he had endured incident to his transformation into a full-fledged cowpuncher. Of the hardships and dangers that come to every rider of the range, he had experienced his share and faced them bravely, thereby winning the respect of the tough, lion-hearted men among whom he had cast his lot. But all the weary months had been wasted. He had failed his object. He could not forget. It even seemed to him that instead of growing more endurable with time, the soreness in his heart and the sting of regret increased with every day. He wondered if she felt the separation, if she cared. As his thoughts wandered back over the past 2 years, he recalled every incident of their acquaintance. The day he had first seen her, as she stepped gracefully out beside the piano to sing. The song she had sung, "The hours I spent with thee, dear heart, are as a string of pearls to me." Then the sweet days which followed. Their enjoyment together of symphony, oratorio, and opera. And now he's a cowpuncher. He could see her as she appeared on that wonderful day when he had met her at the altar of the church and spoken the words that were to bring them together through life. How beautiful she was, and how proud he had been of her as they walked down the broad aisle. He looked back at their wedding trip as a beautiful dream. How well he remembered the return to the lovely home he had prepared for her, and the first dear days within the walls. How happy they had been, and how he had loved her. Had loved her, he did love her. And then the shadow had come over their home. He asked himself bitterly why he had not been more patient with her and made allowances for her high spirits or moods in their quarrels. She was such a child. He could see now that he had been wrong. Never! The words she had spoken in the heat of her anger had burned themselves into his heart. He also recalled every word of his response. "Your words convince me that we cannot live together any longer, and I will neither forget nor forgive them. I am going away." That was all. Without another word, he had left her, standing white and motionless in the center of her dainty chamber, and gone from the beautiful home to come out here to the wildest spot he could find, and plunge into the perilous life he was now leading in the vain effort to forget. Well, that's pathetic. Then his thoughts strayed to the strange postal card he had received the day before. It had been directed in care of his attorney and forwarded by his lawyer to the remote mountain post office where Waring received his mail. It was an ordinary postal card. Its peculiarity consisted in the fact that the communication on the back was composed not in words but in music, 4 measures, in the key of G. He had hummed the notes over and over, and thought they had a strangely familiar sound, yet he could not place the fragment, nor even determine the composer. It had a meaning. Of that he was convinced, but what could it be? Who could have sent it? Among his friends were many musicians, any one of whom might have adopted such a method of communication with him. He began to hum the phrase as he rode around the cattle. Suddenly, while in the midst of the passage, oh, thank you. Suddenly, while in the midst of a passage from one of the great works of a master composer, he stopped short in surprise. He was singing the notes on the card. It had come to him like a flash. He wrote some words beneath the notes. There was no mistake. He had solved the mystery. Pulling up with a jerk that almost lifted the iron-jawed bronco from the ground, he hurled himself from the saddle and reached the boss in 2 bounds. "I must be in Denver tonight. I want your best horse, quick. It's only 60 miles to Empire, and I can get the train there. It leaves at 1 o'clock, and I can make it if you'll lend me Star. I know he's your pet horse, but I tell you, Mr. Coberly, this means everything to me. I simply must get there. I tell you, you ought to know, Jack, that I won't lend Star, so what's the use of asking? What's the matter with you that you're in such a confounded rush?" Waring drew the boss beyond earshot of the listening cowpuncher, spoke to him rapidly and earnestly, finally handing him the postal card, which Coberly scanned intently. A change came over his face. "Why didn't you show me this card at first? Of course you can have the horse. Hi there, some of you boys round up the horses and rope Star for Mr. Waring." In an incredibly short time, a rush of hooves announced the arrival of the horses. A dozen hands made quick work of saddling, and with a hurried goodbye all around, Waring swung himself up and astride the magnificent animal and was off on his long ride. The long pacing strides of Coverly's pet covered the ground in a surprising manner, and 8 o'clock found 20 miles behind his nimble feet. A 5-minute stop, and then on across country to the stage station, 15 miles away. It lacked 20 minutes to 10 when Waring drew rein. He unsaddled and turned the big thoroughbred into the corral. A half-hour's rest would put new life into him. 22 miles to the railroad, and nearly 3 hours in which to cover it. But the range must be crossed, and Waring knew that the next 10 miles of steep climbing to the summit of Berthoud Pass meant more than twice that distance on the flat plain. At 10:15, Star was carrying him up the road. Up and up they went, mile after mile. 2 miles from the top, Waring dismounted and led his panting horse along the icy trail. The rare air seemed to burn his lungs as he struggled up the remaining distance to the summit of the pass, 12,000 feet above sea level. Down at last to the level road they came, with 5 miles still to go. Rounding a turn in the road, he spied a horseman approaching. The stranger eyed him sharply as he drew near, and suddenly whipped out a 6-shooter. "Hold up there! I want to know where you're going with Joe Coberly's horse." "I've been working for Coberly, and he lent me the horse to ride over here to catch the next train." "That yarn won't do. I know old Joe, and I happen to know that he wouldn't lent that horse to his own brother, let alone one of his cowpunchers. I guess I'll have to lock you up here till the boys come over after you. Look here, Mr. Sheriff, I'm telling you the truth. It's no use, my friend, your story won't hold water. Why are you in such a tearing hurry, anyway?" Waring remembered the postal card. He reached into his breast pocket and produced it. "That's my reason for haste," he said, "and that is why Coberly let me take his horse." And he added a few words of explanation. Keeping this captive covered with the muzzle of his gun, the officer took the card. As he read it, his face lighted up and his revolver lowered. "That's all right, youngster. I'm sorry I stopped you. I hope you won't miss the train. I'll ride down to the station with you, as some of the boys might want to string you up on account of the horse. Everybody knows him." In a few moments they saw the town before them, a mile distant. The train was at the station. A touch of the spur, and Star stretched out into a run that left the sheriff behind. The black smoke began to come in heavy puffs from the funnel of the engine, and the line of cars moved slowly away from the station. Then it was that Star showed the spirit he was made of. He bounded forward and swept down upon the town like a whirlwind. As the crowd of train-time loafers lounged around the station, their attention was attracted to the 2 swiftly approaching riders, and they paused to watch the race. Presently one cried, "Hello, that first horse is Coberly's black, and he's sure moving, too. The other fellow ain't in it. Why, it's the sheriff, and he's after the other chap. Horse thief!" Sheriff didn't help at all, did he? The others took up the cry of horse thief, and as Warren flashed past the building at Star's top speed, a volley of shots greeted him.
Oh no.
Finally, they went wild. Fortunately, they went wild, and before any more could be fired, the sheriff tore into the crowd, roaring, "Stop shooting, that man's all right, he's only trying to catch the train." Then there was a mad rush to the track where a view of the race could be obtained. Warren, with eyes fixed and jaws set, was riding desperately 30 feet. The spectators in the doorway of the last car gazed breathlessly. 20 feet. And still he gained. Only 5 feet now. Inch by inch he crawled up. He was abreast of the platform. Swerving his flying horse close to the track, Warren leaned over and grasped the railing with both hands, lifting himself free from the saddle. Shook his feet from the stirrups and swung himself over the steps of the car. The faint sound of a cheer reached him from the distant depot. As the train neared Denver, Warren remembered something he had forgotten in his excitement, that the banks would probably be closed and that he would probably be unable to cash a check. But the postal card had served well thus far. Perhaps its mission was not yet ended. Jumping into a carriage, he was driven to the nearest drugstore where he consulted a directory. "To 900 South 17th Street, he cried as he entered the vehicle. Arriving at the destination, he sprang out and, saying, "Wait," ran up the steps of the palatial residence. To a dignified butler who opened the door, he said, "I wish to see Mr. Foster. My name is Warren. I haven't a card with me." That gentleman entered immediately. "Mr. Foster, you are the president of the Denver National Bank, which I believe handles the western interest of the Second National Bank of Boston?" "Yes." "I have an account at the Second, and I want you to cash a check for me. It's after banking hours, I know, and even if it were not, I have no immediate means of identification. It is of the greatest importance that I take the Eastern Express tonight, or I would not come to you in this irregular way." "One moment, Mr. Warren. Pardon me for interrupting you, but it will save your time as well as my own if I say that what you say is impossible, as you should know. My advice is that you wire your bank for money." "Of course. I know I can do that, but it means a day's delay, and that is what I want to avoid. See here, Mr. Foster, I'm willing to apply any amount within reason for this accommodation if you will oblige me. It must be a very urgent matter that requires such haste. Really, Mr. Warren, I must positively decline to do anything for you." Cold shoulders on every side. "It is an urgent matter," and he told of the postal car and its purpose, adding a brief account of his efforts to get into the city in time to take the train that night. "Let me see the card. From what is it taken, did you say?" Upon hearing the answer, he left the room to return in a few moments with a musical score, which he had laid upon the table, and turned the pages until he found what he sought. Carefully he compared the music on the card with that on the printed sheet. Then, turning to the younger man, he said, "I will see to this myself. It will, of course, be purely a personal matter, as it is contrary to all my business methods. But I cannot resist such an appeal as this. What amount do you require?" $100 will serve my purpose." "Make your check for $150. You will need that much unless you care to travel in your present costume. You can cash this at the Brown Palace Hotel. I will phone the cashier, so you'll have no trouble." Warren tried to thank him, but he would not listen. "You're perfectly welcome, my boy. I'm glad to be able to help you. You have my best wishes for a pleasant journey. Goodbye." A swift hand clasp, and Warren ran down the steps. "Telegraph office," he shouted. Then, minutes later, these words were speeding over the wire. "Postal received. Arrived Boston Friday night. See Luke 113. Jack." When the Chicago Limited pulled out of Denver that evening, John Talbot Warren, attired in the garments of the most approved fashion, was standing on the rear platform of the Pullman, softly humming from the great oratorio, the Messiah. There was a tender light in his eyes as he gazed at the postal card he held in his hand, and these were the words he read: "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." At the same moment, 2,000 miles away, in the east, a pale young wife was holding a telegram close to her lips. An open Bible lay on the bed beside her. Turning softly on her pillow, she glanced lovingly at the dainty cradle and whispered, "Thou shalt call his name John." The end.